You want to get to work?
In this video, I'm going to show you how I built this mid-century white oak dresser. Like most projects, I started this by cutting the material to rough lengths over at the miter saw. I then mill it all down with the joiner planer just over the final thickness. And to finish it off, it's over to the table saw to rip everything to width. With all of my pieces cut, I could start gluing up all 6 panels. The top, 2 sides, the bottom, middle divider, and the drawer faces. Essentially, this build only has 2 types of joinery, miter joints and stop dados, and a domino. What? But we'll go into more detail on the joinery as we get there. Once everything's dry and out of the clamps and cleaned up on the drum sander, I rip the panels down to final width, then tilt my table saw blade to 45 degrees and cross cut the miter joints using the table saw sled. To create the bevel on the face of the dresser, I made a mark 1/8 of an inch in off of the outside edge, and then slowly advanced the fence until I reached that mark. On to adding the stop dados in the top and the bottom panels. Started by finding the center of what will be the inside face of the top and bottom panel and draw out where my dado will go, and well, stop. I used a 3/8 inch setup block to set the depth for the dado, which will be cut using a 3/4 inch straight bit. Then added a rabbet to the back of the panels so that I could attach the back panel later. I used dominoes to connect the outside of the cabinet just to help with alignment. It's not necessary, but it just made it a whole lot easier for a cabinet this big doing it by myself. Then mark the dados for the horizontal divider. Also on the center divider, where the horizontal and center divider will intersect. Take the center divider over to the table saw and just clear out the material between my 2 lines. It is now time for a very stressful glue up. So I just placed the center divider in place temporarily just to act as a support while I was doing the glue up. While the outer cabinet dried, I started on the base, so I'll mark out the angles for my feet, take it over to the miter saw, and just eyeball that angle. Then take the pieces over to the domino using the domino dock to mortise out the holes for the domino. Then cut the rails to length. Add the dominoes to the end of the rails so that I can connect the feet and then glue them together. Once the cabinet was dry, I took it out of the clamps and I marked out where the horizontal divider will intersect with the vertical divider, and then took that over to the table saw and used the table saw sled to clear out the material between my marks. And if it's done right, it should look like this.
I used a 3/8 inch roundover to round over the outside edge of the horizontal divider to give me a rounded profile. I then glued the horizontal divider in place. Gluing in the vertical divider. While that was drying, I moved back to the base and I cut the outside angle for the base. And then to connect the outside rails, I guess they would call them rails, I don't know. I just transferred that angle to a piece of scrap and then took it over to the table saw and tilted the table saw blade until it matched that angle. Once I found it, I cut my 2 rails to length and then cut that angle and then mortised out the domino locations for those side rails. Then added all the dominoes to connect the center supports, which will be used to attach the base to the outer cabinet. So I decided to add the roundover to the base prior to doing my glue up. If you're gonna do this, be careful because you don't wanna add any type of roundover or profile where you have connectors like I did just now. So I had to cut this leg off right here and re-mortise the domino into the end, cut a new leg, glue it back up, wait for it to dry so I could repeat. If you are gonna do it, you wanna stop early. You wanna stop right here or before that. And you'll be left with something like this. Once that was dry, I can move on to finally assembling the base, attaching all the rails. Once it was dry, taking it out of the clamps and finishing that roundover profile on this outside rail. So I'm using Bloom drawer slides for this build. I'm not gonna go through in detail how to install these or how to build the drawer boxes because that would just make this video way too long. I'll show that in a future video on how I build my drawer boxes. So I attached all the drawer slides and hardware. So before attaching the base to the outside of the cabinet, I decided to finish the base just because it would be a lot easier to finish now. So I applied the finish, and I'm using Rubio Monocoat Bourbon. Once it was dry, I used a Forstner bit to countersink a hole for where the screws will sit, and then I drilled an oversized hole to allow for wood movement, and then I could move on to attaching the base to the outside of the cabinet. Once it was attached, I flipped it over and installed my drawer boxes, and move on to cutting my drawer faces. So to keep that continuous grain look, so I ripped them down. And I pre-drilled my hardware holes and I used the card method and then just use those hardware holes to temporarily attach the drawer faces to the drawers, and then I could come back and clamp and then screw from the inside of the drawer. And once those screws were installed, finish drilling the through hole for the dresser pulls. Finish sanding everything.
As stated in the title of this video, this project does have a bonus feature, which is the bedding topper that you see me gluing together right now. The dresser will be used as a change table. So this will hold the little bedding topper, and then when it gets a little bit older and we no longer need this, it can be removed and just be a normal dresser.
And adding the finish to the rest of the cabinet. Again, I'm using Rubio Monocoat Bourbon. Once the outside of the cabinet was dry, I could attach the back panel just used a sheet of 1/2-inch plywood. I know that's a little bit of overkill for this cabinet, but that was the size rabbet that I cut, and it's the material I had on hand, so that's what I used. Then it could be put in its final home, which will be my son's room in a few months. Hope you guys enjoyed. If so, consider liking the video, subscribe. I'll have more videos like this in the future. Thank you guys for watching.